One. Today's video, we're going to touch up on vitamin D. Although we have made some videos before, things change so fast that kind of feel like it needs a follow-up. And also summer is here now. Importance of vitamin D is not to be underestimated. And more often than not, I specifically have seen that people who live in great sunny countries end up with vitamin D deficiency. What the hell is happening?
Yeah.
So could you deconstruct why is vitamin D crucial for health and how it's actually synthesized in the body? And what I would really love to understand is the difference between the vitamin D that our body creates itself, how it does it, and supplement form of vitamin D. Maybe there is something that needs to be taken into account and something that can affect the outcome on performance, health, overall well-being.
Yeah. So let's start with the natural side of this because it'll make it easier to explain. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just share my screen real quick, and that will kind of just allow me to have a picture to speak to. So this right here is what we got going on. So at the very top right here, we have a little star. This is where everything starts. Now, vitamin D is not considered a sex hormone, but it is a hormone, right? It's not a vitamin. That's a misnomer. It's not a vitamin. It's actually a hormone. The reason why is because it's got a cholesterol backbone, just like all of these hormones that you see right here. Most people will recognize the sex hormones, right? Progesterone, testosterone, and your estrogens, right? Those are sex hormones, but you also have other things that are not sex hormones that are in here, like cholesterol or cortisol, sorry, and then vitamin D. But vitamin D's, like I said, been left out because it's considered a vitamin. It's actually a hormone. Now, the synthesis starts with the star, and that is cholesterol. Now, in this little diagram, it says cholesterol and just blanket statement cholesterol. It's actually your LDL cholesterol, right? So LDL cholesterol is what's being sulfated and turned into all of these.
You said LDL cholesterol is being sulfated. Can you just expand what that process actually means?
Yes. So sulfating cholesterol happens as the following. Any chemical reaction needs some kind of energy input. Most people are taught, especially in chemistry, that it's a temperature change, right? Mostly adding heat to a reaction will accelerate it or things of that nature. In this particular case, it's UVB light. And that's why I kind of hate that they don't add vitamin D here, because everybody on the planet knows that you get vitamin D from the sun, right? But because it's not on the sheet, people forget that, oh, these baseline hormones, the pregnenolone and the DHEA, are also coming from the sun. They come from the same action. So that is what sulfation is. It's UV light hitting the surface of your skin, and you should have, most healthy people should have a layer of subcutaneous body fat. And you have that there in that specific part of your body next to your surfaces, so that when UV light hits it, it sulfates the LDL molecule in your fat cells. And that then gets liberated into the bloodstream. So that little part is crucial to understand. It's in your fat. When light hits it, it gets sulfated. The cholesterol molecule is now called sulfated cholesterol. And that is now susceptible to hydrolysis, meaning water can now interact with that molecule and turn it into things. One of them is 25 hydroxy vitamin D. So that's the vitamin D that you get a blood check on. It says right on the test, 25 hydroxy. What does that mean? That means that it is hydrophilic. It means it moves in water. It is water soluble. So the vitamin D that your body makes is a water soluble version of vitamin D, and it's made at the skin and immediately can go into the bloodstream. This is important to understand, and we'll just move right into this point. That's what makes it different than taking a pill of vitamin D. A pill of vitamin D is only fat soluble vitamin D. So what does that mean What would be the implications of, oh, I'm just going to supplement my low vitamin D with a supplemental pill? This is what it means. Anytime that you supplement one of these three that I've circled here, you have the potential to back up the system of LDL molecule. So your LDL will go up if you supplement vitamin D, pregnenolone, or DHEA, or a combination of thereof with enough dosage, right? So if you're really low vitamin D and you're like, oh, I'm just going to take 10,000 units of vitamin D for like 8 weeks or whatever, that's enough vitamin D that you're consuming orally that your LDL cholesterol will probably go up, especially if it's in the winter time. In the summertime, it's less likely, especially if you're getting sunlight, because the LDL molecule obviously doesn't just turn into vitamin D, it turns into pregnenolone and DHEA as well. So there's other streams to go for. But that is crucial to understand, right? When you take a bunch of vitamin D and then you go to the doctor, and the doctor rarely asks what kind of vitamins you're taking. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And then all of a sudden your LDL cholesterol comes back high and he goes, oh, you need a statin. Well, hold up. If you're taking vitamin D, maybe the solution is stop taking your vitamin D, get out in the sun to sulfate the LDL cholesterol to turn it into the products that it's supposed to turn into, right? It's kind of like having an excess of raw material that you're not doing anything with, right?
So again, it brings us back to, if you're doing blood tests and you're not getting interviewed at the end, you're probably not getting the best advice possible, right?
100%. 100%. Yeah, especially if they're not asking common questions like this. Hey, your LDL cholesterol came back high. Do you take DHEA or pregnenolone or vitamin D? Do you take any one of these first three here? And if they don't even ask you that question, they really don't have any real leg to stand on advice on what to do about your vitamin or your LDL cholesterol, right? Because it could be as simple as, hey, just stop taking one of those three, or maybe you're taking all of those three, right? and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I see why you would want to stop that, to see, because it might not even be a problem with your cholesterol system, right? It could just be like, hey, you're just not turning it into the things that you're doing because you're taking them exogenously, right?
Yeah, and we do see this a lot, and I don't know, I have not seen in US, but in UK, you can see the person who has given you advice, and you can actually Google them and find out what they do. And I have seen like doctors who have given you a feedback, like completely unrelated to professions they actually are. So they're giving you a feedback on your blood test, but they are doing some kind of working with kids or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
the
they're a pediatrician or something like
that
that.
you could easily Google yourself. Hey, what does my low vitamin D level means? And it just gives you a generic response, but they give you a feedback base that this doctor gave you feedback. When in reality, you could have Googled it yourself, and it doesn't really help you figuring out what can be done to improve your health. So this actually kind of, when you dissect it in this way, is highlighting why the interviewing part is still extremely important, instead of just looking, oh, this is red, this is in range, and that's it. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And so let's kind of put this together in terms of, hey, maybe you're not taking any supplements and your LDL cholesterol is still high, right? Well, what if we just came from winter where there's not very much sun? I expect your LDL to be high. In fact, your liver is anticipating that. That's why it's making the LDL cholesterol, so that when the sun gets strong again and you interact with it, there's enough raw substrate to immediately start making vitamin D, pregnenolone, and DHEA, right? So you also have to take into context of what time of the year are we looking at this blood work, right? Maybe it's important for it to be going up at this time of the year so that you can turn it into things later in the year, right? And the other thing is, we'll talk a little bit in the intricacies, specifically, again, this video is about vitamin D and not the sex hormones. So we're going to talk specifically about oral vitamin D supplementation and situations where, like you highlighted, the person lives in a sunny environment and acts by going outside in a sunny environment, but their vitamin D does not go up, right? That is a phenomenon associated with something that a lot of people may know, but it's kind of hit or miss if they know it, even a doctor. And that's this: vitamin A and vitamin D are on the same receptor complex, right? If you look in the literature, it says RXR for retinol receptor, right? So retinol is another word for vitamin A. and it's always coupled to the DVR, which is the vitamin D receptor. They're always coupled together. So what that tells you is this: they control each other. When vitamin D goes up, vitamin A comes down. When vitamin A goes up, vitamin D comes down. Now, that is so that they can stop each other from making too much, right? Because what I just said was, oh, you make vitamin D from sunlight and cholesterol. If you're making cholesterol and you're getting lots of sunlight, you're just going to continue to produce vitamin D. And that's true to a certain extent, but your body, there's always going to be too much, right? If that scenario just continued to exist. So there's a break for it, and the break is the vitamin A. Hey, as long as you're eating foods that have vitamin A in it, you're never going to make too much vitamin D. It's always going to get cut off right around that 100 nanometers per deciliter mark. And that is something that a lot of people don't take into account. So now let's look at it from the other perspective. If your vitamin A is really, really high, your vitamin D is not going to be allowed to come up. Now, most people would immediately, because there is a crowd out there that kind of knows this, and they're big time anti-retinol supplementation and vitamin A supplementation, and they try to like not eat foods that have vitamin A. It's not the vitamin A that you're consuming, again, because that vitamin A does something special that we have vaguely talked about, and we'll mention it here, is vitamin A in diurnal creatures is tied to all of your opsin receptors, all of your melanopsin, your rhodopsin, and there's 5 opsins that are photoreceptors all over your body. Vitamin A is bound to them, but it's bound to them very loosely. Why? Because when light hits it, vitamin A should be released so that when you get a lot of light, there's more vitamin A there. Why would you want that? Because when there's a lot of light, it should be coming from the sun, and you would be making a lot of vitamin D. So it releases a lot of vitamin A to make sure you don't make too much vitamin D. Now, here's the caveat. Most people live with a lot of light, but it's not sunlight. So they're releasing a whole lot of vitamin A, but there's no UV light in the light that they're using because it's all artificial light. So the vitamin D stays suppressed, and the vitamin A continues to go higher and higher and higher. And then when they do get out in the sun, what's really been interpreted is from the body, from a physics, biochemistry, and biophysics perspective, is this: hey, this person's been getting a lot of light. They should have been making a lot of vitamin D. That's why we're continuing to release vitamin A, because vitamin A is loosely bound to the opsin receptors. So whenever light hits it, it gets released. It doesn't care what kind of light. As long as light is hitting it, it's going to get released vitamin A. And then you have a low vitamin D of like a 30, and you go out in the sun and you sit there and you're like, man, I get fried and my vitamin D doesn't come up. What it tells me is you have way too many artificial lights interacting with you. And I'm going to add a caveat here. Light, like we've explained in previous episode, is not just the visual light that you can see. It's the electromagnetic fields that you can see, especially wireless ones. Those are light that you can't see. So if you're interacting and getting bombarded by Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and LED lights all the time, 16 hours out of the day, or some people literally never turn off their Wi-Fi router, sleep with their phone next to their head, you're basically being bombarded even while you sleep. So your vitamin A is way through the roof, which is why there's a crowd out there saying that vitamin A is bad for you. It's not that the vitamin A is bad for you. It's the environment that people are living in that are releasing way too much vitamin A into the system because it's loosely bound to all of your light receptors. And we happen to live in a world where we have excess light that is not the sun, so it's not making vitamin D to begin with, and it starts to suppress the production of vitamin D because that's its job. Yeah, do you follow me with what I just said?
You just described me. It just reminded me a lot of people that I work with, whom I really sometimes find very hard to kind of get through. And let me give you an example. So a lot of people like doing detoxes. I still believe it's a great thing. I'm like, yeah, it might be a great thing, but would be good if you looked after yourself so you don't need to detox yourself to begin with. But other than that, so they usually have this celery juice obsession. We do know that too much of a good thing is a thing. So they have a lot of celery juice every single day. More often than not, they don't eat any animal-based products now, so their cholesterol intake is very low. Then they will use a lot of sunscreens, and they will work on laptop all day through. And at the end of that, they have sex drive issues, and they will go, usually females, and they will go to their doctor to try to fix their hormones. And when I tell them, hey, maybe we need to slightly change your lifestyle, they just go like, no, my naturopath said I just need to take XYZ pill and it's going to be fine. So how do you break, does this make sense? Can this lead to impaired sexual health
Absolutely.
down the line?
Yeah,
Because what you just
absolutely.
described me is literally what's in my point of view is happening all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
They're doing too much of good thing because they're taking out all the things that we were told are bad, which we do know now that cholesterol isn't the culprit. It's just not.
No,
It's just
there's not, there is no
learning how
studies
to
that
use
have
it in your
confirmed.
advantage. That's what we
Yeah,
need to do.
yeah, you need, exactly. There's a reason why your body's making it, right? Like everybody's like, well, we found that, the cholesterol intake from food doesn't really affect the cholesterol that's being put in your blood. So then you go, okay, well, where is it coming from? Well, your liver is probably making it. And then they, develop statin drugs to stop that from happening. Where do they target? They target the liver to stop it from making the cholesterol molecule. Then you got to take a step back.
Right.
Why? Why is it being made, right? And then if you go look at the rest of the body, right? That's why I don't do blood work with, hey, you just gave me some blood pressure and cholesterol numbers. I'm like, that doesn't tell me anything, right?
Yeah.
Because I need to know the downstream things, right? Like the slide that I just showed. I need to know the downstream things, right? If those are suppressed and your cholesterol is high, what it tells me is you're either not interacting in the correct environment, or the environment that you're interacting with is causing a loop to close somewhere else. In this case that I just described, the vitamin A loop that controls vitamin D. So I love to keep track of vitamin D intake unsupplemented, right? Unsupplemented vitamin D in the summertime. Now, if you get it to the winter and your vitamin D is still low, I'm okay with supplementing vitamin D, because I already know that you're not going to be able to make it, and I already, prep the person. Hey, your LDL cholesterol is probably going to go up a little bit when we supplement vitamin D, twofold, because you don't have enough sunlight to sulfate it into other things, and because when we add vitamin D that's oral, it's going to probably back it up. Don't freak out if your LDL goes up. It's going to happen, right? You don't need to do anything because it's seasonal, right? It's seasonal. You're not staying on vitamin D for 3 years, right? You're staying on vitamin D for 3 months. And then your job is to make it itself. And then if we take it away and you tell me you're doing all the right things, right? Hey, I get out in the sun and I get tan, but then vitamin D isn't being made. What it tells me is vitamin A is probably through the roof. We probably better check that. Or I mentioned it in the process of sulfating the cholesterol. Water can now interact with that cholesterol molecule. In other words, hydrolysis can now act upon the sulfated cholesterol. What does that mean? That means that cellular hydration matters to make vitamin D, right? So now there's two things we got to look at. Hey, do you have too much vitamin A? Are you, do you work indoors? Do you work around Wi-Fi, et cetera? Get that kind of flattened out. Where do you live, right? Maybe you live right in the middle of downtown New York. You might not be able to mitigate some of this, right? So there's that concept. And then there's the concept of, hey, these things, electromagnetic fields, do something else to cellular water. They reduce it. They dehydrate you, right? So now because everybody's like, well, how does, there's the vitamin D concept that I just described, but then there's also the dehydration effect. That's why I'm not joking. There can be people that literally get tan and their vitamin D doesn't move at all, not even 1 point. And that's when they have a combination of lots of vitamin A plus a dehydration effect happening from their electromagnetic field footprint environment that's dehydrating the cells. So now that not only can they not raise vitamin D from the vitamin A suppressing it, they can't even hydrolyze the sulfated cholesterol. So what ends up happening in their blood work is their vitamin D stays really low, but their sex hormones also stay very low, right? Mainly the one that I track is DHEA because it's one of those first ones. So if you're not supplementing DHEA, your vitamin D stays suppressed, but your DHEA climbs, it tells me you don't have a water problem, you just have a vitamin A problem, right? But if your vitamin D stays low and your DHEA stays low, now you probably have both a vitamin A and a hydration problem because that sulfated cholesterol is not being acted upon by enough cellular water to hydrolyze into all these things, right? So again, knowing these pathways, knowing how they work, starts to tell you, hey, hydration wise, are you drinking water that's got fluoride in it? That's a problem. Let's pull that out. Are you taking some time to leave the environment so that you can hydrate better by doing some grounding and getting some red light therapy, either free from the sun or to a place with a device, or having your own things of that nature. Maybe implementing things that can add in hydration, right? Something that we've noted in your blood work in the past, there are hormones that cause cellular hydration, right? Maybe that may be a viable thing depending on your age and your risk factors and kind of what you're doing, right? Things like nandrolone would be hydrating, that's readily available for people in the bodybuilding and physique enhancing community. Other things like prolactin. Hey, if you're pregnant, you're probably going to experience less of these effects, and you're probably going to make more proper sex hormones because you're getting more cellular hydration through the prolactin pathway. Not everybody can handle that, but I have noted that not just in you, at least 5 people now that have been having their prolactin checked. When they travel or have a lot of electromagnetic fields, boom, prolactin goes up. Not as high as yours, but definitely goes up compared
They
to
probably
that.
were traveling every 2 weeks for like
Yeah.
hours a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. So that is definitely something that happens. The body tries to compensate for electromagnetic field interference by trying to hydrate itself. Not everybody is as lucky to hydrate properly intracellular, and it may need some support. But those are the concepts to understand, that
Mm.
people think that, hey, just get sunlight and vitamin D happens. There are some steps in there that are important to understand. Too much vitamin A, not enough cellular hydration, both of those will stop the vitamin D from being created. And that's when I know, hey, you got a problem, right? But most of the time, I would say 80% of the people that have higher LDL and low vitamin D and low sex hormones, it's just that they're not interacting with the sun properly, right?
Right, right.
And so I'll describe that right now. If I just had my shirt on, right, my forearms and my face are about the only thing that it's going to interact with the sun. That's like 10% of the skin on your body, right? So you're going to make about 10% of your capabilities of vitamin D. So it's just not going to move very much, right? Like people say, well, every summer my vitamin D comes up like 10 points, and I spend a lot of time outside. But then I go, okay, well, what part of your body is exposed? Because you have to understand this. My forearm will get dark, right? Like if my forearm is the only thing that gets exposed, after a month, that forearm makes less vitamin D than it did a month before. Why? Because it got darker. That's on purpose. The skin gets darker so that it doesn't overproduce certain things. But if that's the only skin that's ever getting exposed, well, then you would literally go, hey, a month of half okay vitamin D production, and then the rest of the summer is mediocre or not very much, because the skin that is chronically exposed now makes less vitamin D. So what I try to tell people is, all of your tan lines, you want to get rid of them or attempt to make them diminish, because the skin that's still pale is the skin that's going to make the most vitamin D, right? So a month into the summer, right now the weather is nice and warm, you start taking more of your clothing off and you start getting rid of more tan lines, so that more of that skin that's been pale starts to continue to create sulfation effects of cholesterol into vitamin D and into all your sex hormones. It can be all at once. That's kind of how I handle it. I just take off my shirt all the time. But I know that's not everybody's cup of tea. So you lean into it progressively. The first month, fine, just t-shirts. The next month, tank tops. The next month, workout tops, right? So that there's more and more skin chronically being exposed each month of high sun, so that you gradually continue to make more vitamin D instead of having a kind of a rise and then a kind of a dip, because no new skin is producing more and more sulfation.
Can you dig into deeper into what other health benefits are from, because obviously you touched up a little bit on sexual health and whatnot. I'm more interested in like muscle building, aesthetics purposes. Maybe there is something to do with bone density, things like that. So
Yeah, absolutely. So
makes it so goddamn important?
yeah, like, so in the literature, like if you go looking, like there's a lot of, hey, vitamin D influences this, vitamin D influences that. They're taking it a little bit out of context. High vitamin D values, right? Because they're looking at blood work and bone mineral densities and comparing them together. And basically what they come to is, hey, people that have a high vitamin D tend to have really good bone mineral density, tend to have really good sex hormones, tend to have really good mental health, right? And the reason for that is not the vitamin D directly, right? The vitamin D is a prohormone and it interacts with all those systems as a feedback mechanism of, hey, vitamin D is nice and high, these systems can be upregulated. It's kind of like giving the green light. But the reason why it's giving the green light is because in order to make the proper amount of vitamin D, you need the proper amount of sunlight, right? So let's talk about bone for a minute, right? Bone is piezoelectric, meaning that when you compress it, it creates electricity. But the way that it makes that electrical charge is through a capacitor type system, which is copper related. Copper is blue, which means that it reflects everything but blue, but it really, really absorbs red because blue is the opposite of red. So your bones are meant to absorb infrared light. So when vitamin D goes up, there's lots of strong sun. That's what it means, which also then tells the body, hey, the bones should be receiving a lot of infrared light. So that means we can upregulate how copper acts in them, right? So the vitamin D is giving the system, the bone system, the okay to upregulate that system because there should be plenty of infrared light interacting with the copper molecule in your bones, and now your bones can grow and get thicker and stuff like that. That's from a orthopedic perspective, right? Good bone density, good joint density, things of that nature. From a aesthetics perspective, leptin is crucial to be able to be regulated, to regulate appetite and regulate body fat loss and all of those types of things. We know this. There's lots of studies that say this and show this. In fact, they even link leptin to GLP-1, which it totally is. And what's the most popular drugs on the market right now? GLP-1 agonists. Why do they work so successfully? Is because they're tied to the leptin receptor, and the leptin receptor is broken in most people. How can I say that? Because the leptin molecule is in fat cells. Most people get this wrong. They say that fat cells secrete leptin, and it's technically true, but that paints the picture that fat cells are always releasing leptin. That's not true. Leptin is in the fat cell, and when UV light hits the leptin, or the fat cell, sorry, then the fat cell releases leptin, not before and not at any other point in time. So if you don't get UV light interacting with fat cells, which coincidentally makes vitamin D, leptin never gets released, right? So that's why high vitamin D levels are also associated with good appetite control, because leptin is actively being released into the bloodstream when you make vitamin D, right? The same action of getting vitamin D, aka interacting with the sun properly, does, I don't know, probably 100 different things in different systems in the body to do other things like regulate your appetite and energy expenditure through the release of leptin into the bloodstream, right? And then on the flip side, just like I said with vitamin D, if you interact with a lot of electromagnetic fields or a lot of artificial light, or, you know, that could be meaning that you work swing shift, right? So you're at night, you have a lot of light interacting with you, right? That raises vitamin A, suppresses vitamin D. Well, guess what else it'll do to leptin? Leptin doesn't really do anything in the bloodstream. It's just being released into the bloodstream during the day when you interact with the sun. Then when you go to sleep, if melatonin got released and then T4 got released and then growth hormone got released, the next thing that gets interacted with is leptin. That happens around midnight if you're asleep, right? So leptin that's in the bloodstream from being released during the day can now enter the hypothalamus to relay the message of, hey, this is how much body fat this person has on their body. So if it's adequate, the body interprets that at the middle of the day, so it can do one of the next steps. What's the next step after about 1 or 2 a.m.? 3 or 4 p.m. is when your body starts to convert T4 that it made earlier in the night into T3. T3 is going to upregulate your metabolism and make you more active, and then interact with cortisol to make you more active, especially if the leptin got put into the hypothalamus correctly and the body goes, oh, this person has plenty of body fat on them, we should just upregulate all systems. It's good energy, there's good inflows of energy in whatever environment this person is interacting with, so now that person is more active and less hungry and expending more body fat because it got the correct signal from leptin. But most people have low vitamin D, which means they have low leptin, which means their body is interpreting that as this person does not have that much body fat on them. We should probably not upregulate their metabolism, and we should probably make them a little bit hungrier. How does it make you a little bit hungrier? By regulating GLP-1, right? And so that's why GLP-1 drugs are very successful, because they're a step in this loop that's broken.
So from all that, it's it's so much to kind of unwrap. But basically, this is highlighting me one thing that I think you might agree on, that good vitamin D levels without taking any supplement just show us how good your lifestyle habits are, which essentially helps with everything else down the line. If your vitamin D
Absolutely.
levels are off and you're taking some supplement, your doctor or your health professional, whatever, they could tell you, hey, you're completely fine, but you are just masking the issue, which somewhere down the line might lead to obesity, foreign bone density, and so on and so forth, just because we did not catch it on time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, right? Like you can be supplementing vitamin D and you keep your vitamin D level perfect, right?
Hmm.
And but you can then go and be like, oh, but my bone mineral density is not that good. It's actually going down.
Hmm.
Or and that baffles people. It even baffles doctors, right? Why is that happening, right? Or hey, my sex hormones are kind of trash, but my vitamin D is good, right? And that doesn't correlate with the literature, right? The
Hmm.
literature shows that vitamin D is good for sex hormones, good for bone density, but the literature doesn't distinguish, which is why we opened with it. It doesn't distinguish between you making your vitamin D and consuming vitamin D. I'm telling you, it is completely different. And if you stop supplementing it and it's bad, just like you highlighted, that tells us you have environmental lifestyle things to change. If it's good, then it gives you the green light, and it's going to be reflected in a bunch of other markers in your blood and markers in DEXA scans like bone mineral density, and also markers in things that are not even hormones like neurotransmitters, right? So we talked about the sulfation of cholesterol. Well, amino acids also get sulfated, right? Certain amino acids like tyrosine and phenylalanine turn into dopamine and melanin and noradrenaline and adrenaline, right? And your thyroid hormones, the backbones them. The thing that interacts with them is UV light, and that's what sulfates them and chops them up to make the backbones for those, right? So if you're getting vitamin D, you're most likely also getting the correct light frequency that sulfates those amino acids. Your thyroid system's probably good. Your tanning ability is probably good. Your dopamine system's probably good. You see what I'm saying? So it all kind of intertwines, and it's all related to vitamin D, because the act of getting vitamin D is also the act that influences all these other systems.
It sounds almost as if we are painting that supplementing vitamin D is not good. That being said, how long is a washout period for somebody who's taking vitamin D to take it out of the equation to understand how good is their body actually at producing vitamin D? And is there a really kind of good evidence that supplementing with it will give us a lot of benefits that we see in literature from having a decent amount of vitamin D in our blood?
So let's start with the first part of that. The washout period I find is right around 5 weeks, right?
Right.
So if you stop, so like you said, if we kind of paint the picture that vitamin D supplementation is bad, and that's not really true, because I will supplement vitamin D with people in the winter because I know they're not going to be able to make it, especially if it's low. But there is a time to cut it out so that we can double check your environment and your lifestyle, right? So that's important to know, because that washout period is important. I usually stop people in the northern hemisphere from taking vitamin D, if we've added it in, somewhere around March, right? The end of March or so. That way, by the end of April, start of May, which is when the sun starts to get good, we know that the vitamin D that they were taking through the winter is not influencing their vitamin D level. And then we can literally take a blood, just a simple vitamin D test, no other marker. You just prick your finger, send it off, get a result back, and then we go, okay, this is your starting vitamin D. Your goal now, at the end of the summer, 3 months later, is to have this as high as possible, right? Do the
Could
actions,
you
right?
check it in the middle as well?
You could, yeah, you could totally could. It should raise like, and for some people, like for me, mine raises about 30 points in like 6 weeks, right? But again, I spend a lot of time outside. I don't expect people to raise that fast,
So it's
but
like
I do
I'm
expect,
outside now, and you can see nitric oxide kicking in just from being
yeah,
outside. My main
yeah,
students.
yeah. And so I, you know, at least 6 weeks of good sun exposure, and then you can check your vitamin D, and it should come up, right? It could come up 5 points, it could come up 10 points, but what you do want to see is that it goes up, right? And if it goes up, then it just keep doing the things that you're doing, and by the end of the summer, right, starting of fall, then you can check it again. And if your vitamin D level that was naturally produced is in the 80s or higher, you don't need supplementation for the winter, because in order for it to get that high, remember, it's water soluble, right? So any excess of the water soluble molecule turns into the fat soluble molecule that you would take orally, right? So it actually works backwards naturally. When you supplement it, we're trying to kind of push it in the incorrect manner. We're going counterclockwise instead of clockwise, because normally you make it water soluble first, and then any excess turns into the fat soluble stuff so that you can use it in the winter and slowly release it, because your liver will store it. And so if your vitamin D level is above 80, you don't need to supplement any vitamin D come winter time. I go, okay, you did a fantastic job during the summer. You're good to go. Just you don't have to take any supplementation. Your LDL cholesterol will stay mildly low. And during the winter, it'll produce a little bit of excess so you can repeat it again the next season. And so there is a time to supplement it. And there is a time to pull it out to verify your environment, your hydration status. Are you getting too much electromagnetic field interference? Those types of things. And then, what was the next part of that question? So washout period.
And taking it synthetically. So when would it be beneficial actually?
Yep. So that would be it. Is anytime that you're in winter, whether you're southern hemisphere or northern hemisphere, the winter for that hemisphere, and your vitamin D level, let's say it's below 40, I would say at that point it would be worth supplementing it, knowing that you may raise your LDL a little bit. That's okay. It's temporary. And the supplementing vitamin D does offer some benefits. And most of those benefits are actually tied to how the vitamin D receptor influences other systems, right? So it's a pro-hormone and turns into things. And though mainly is going to be a little bit influencing neurotransmitter reduction. So like you may have slightly better well-being in terms of just feeling well. It's not going to be the same as sunlight, because the sunlight does a double duty there, right? So vitamin D, just taking it orally, is almost like it's almost like putting a spare tire on your car, right? Like you're gonna keep moving and you're going to be able to get to your final destination just fine, but you're not gonna be able to drive this as fast as the roadway says, right? You're the donut or the replacement tire or whatever you call it in your country, right? It's not capable of handling the full load of all the force of the car is able to produce, right? That's how I view supplementing vitamin D for influencing mental health, for example, or supplementing vitamin D for influencing immunity. That's a popular one. Everybody correlates vitamin D with good immunity. I'm like, it kind of does that by itself, but not very good. It kind of is mediocre at that. It's good to supplement it if it's low. But the thing that's actually going to regulate the immunity, just to kind of highlight that, is in order to make vitamin D, you regulate B cells on your skin. And that also means that you got infrared light, so that regulated your T cells. That's what's actually causing a huge immune, robust system when you have good endogenous vitamin D production.
Yeah, well, I'm mindful of your time, David, so thank you for this. If anyone has more questions, I know I have many, they can always leave some comments down there or join the Solar Athlete group and get them out in live videos. So on that note, I'll see you in the next video.
Awesome. Thank you.